In about an hour from now, Prime Minister Mark Carney will be leaving for Mexico with the focus of this trip on strengthening trade ties. Prime Minister Carney expected to sign a strategic partnership with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum as both countries look to diversify their economies away from the United States. This comes as both Canada and the U.S. and Mexico look to begin formal consultations of CUSMA. Given this three-way trade tensions, where does Canada need to strengthen its ties on this trip? Joining me to find out is John Buscariol. He's an international trade lawyer. Good morning and welcome.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Great to be with you this morning.
So we've been very focused on our changed trade relationship with the U.S., but it is worth a reminder this morning. Mexico is our third largest single country trading partner. In 2024, the value of goods exchanged between our two countries was $56 billion, an important relationship to maintain. With that in mind, what are the industries or sectors that still have room to grow here?
Well, I think it's important, Anne-Marie, to keep in mind that that trade only makes up about 5% of Canada's international trade. By far, the largest partner has been the United States. So we've had decades of integration with the U.S., and up until now, there hasn't really been any reason for Canadian businesses to look elsewhere. So now that we are faced with this Trump tariff threat, and we have been for over half a year now, it is time to start looking to diversify these markets. And when we look to Mexico, there's lots of room to grow that 5%, lots of room to grow that relationship, whether it's in automotive products, agricultural products. Canada's the major exporter in the world of potash, so fertilizers, plastics, heavy machinery, mining, lots of opportunity to grow that relationship.
I don't need to tell you that deal-making is all about relationships, and tensions between Canada and Mexico really ratcheted up, especially after Ontario Premier Doug Ford floated the idea of dropping Mexico altogether from CUSMA and pursuing just a bilateral deal with the United States. First of all, here was his reasoning for that. We'll remind everybody.
You look at Mexico, they're importing cheap products, undercutting our hardworking men and women, not only here, but in the U.S., from China. They're slapping a Made in Mexico sticker on and shipping it up.
How will these kinds of comments and sentiments affect Carney's efforts on this trip?
I think, Anne-Marie, that's a bit of a challenge. I think we've realized since that time that perhaps throwing Mexico under the bus, and a couple of provincial premiers have done that, is not the way to go here. And it is not the path to success in terms of having to deal with the Trump administration, and particularly dealing with the future review of the CUSMA. I think it's important that Canada and Mexico cooperate and compare notes in their approach to that renegotiation and the current negotiations that are going on to deal with the fentanyl tariffs. So I do think the Canadian government has realized that. I think there's been a realization over the last few months that we shouldn't be throwing Mexico under the bus. Indeed, Mexico is an important country to grow our relationship with now that we no longer have this guaranteed access to the U.S. market.
What will Mexico be looking for from Canada?
Well, I do think there's probably a few things. I think one, we're probably going to be comparing notes on our ongoing negotiations to deal with these fentanyl tariffs and the sectoral tariffs that are right now attacking our automotive, aluminum, steel, and copper industries, and other sectors will be targeted in the future there. I think Mexico will want to discuss with Canada as well our approach to the renegotiation of the CUSMA. I think both Canada and Mexico are going to be careful not to appear that they are ganging up on the United States on this, but at the same time, there's going to be some areas where they're going to want to take a common front in addressing that. I think Mexico also is going to want to look at expanding trade with Canada and looking at opportunities in those sectors I mentioned, in particular automotive. You know, I heard the quote from Premier Ford earlier about Mexico importing cheap product from China. In fact, last week, Mexico announced that they're going to be imposing tariffs on automotive products from China and elsewhere in Asia. So I do think Mexico is going in a bit of a different direction than what may have initially been thought. And so I think, again, there's lots of opportunity to grow that relationship. And I think Mexico should be an important trading partner of the United States, of Canada here.
Lots of opportunity, but not necessarily a lot of time. Written into the CUSMA deal is the fact that it's up for review in 2026. We know from Ottawa those discussions have already started. U.S. President Donald Trump has already changed trade policy in both Canada and Mexico. I'm curious then, how much value does CUSMA hold at this point when it already appears that we're all negotiating unilaterally, and in fact, we don't even call it the same thing? It's CUSMA in Canada, the USMCA in the States, and TMEC in Mexico.
Yeah, this is a different environment than we were in when we negotiated NAFTA back in the 90s, and we essentially brought Mexico into the fold. There was a lot more cooperation between the three countries. We're in a very different environment now. The U.S. is taking, obviously, a very different position. I think you've really asked the million-dollar question: what's going to happen to CUSMA as we go forward? I think CUSMA will be preserved. It may look somewhat different than what we have now. The U.S. will be pushing to impose further restrictions on CUSMA. In other words, in the rules of origin, for example, the U.S. is going to be pushing to ensure that a higher proportion of products that get tariff-free access to their market under the CUSMA are made in the United States or come from materials or components in the United States. And I think Canada and Mexico are going to have to decide how they deal with that aggressive push from the United States. But I do think in the long term, we probably will preserve CUSMA, but it may look somewhat different or very different than what it looks like today.
It'll be interesting to see this over the next year. International trade lawyer John Boscario, thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.